Hi, my name is Magdalene, and today I'm going to be walking you through how you can recreate figures in Adobe Illustrator. So I've downloaded this image here, and this image is something that was likely created in a program like Blender, a 3D modeling program. So it's a little bit difficult to get this exact effect in Illustrator, but I'm going to show you how you can use some advanced techniques in order to create something that looks very similar. So today we're going to be using the mesh tool, which is something that I think doesn't get used as often in Illustrator, but it's a really handy tool for creating some interesting effects. So let's get started. We won't be going over the basics, so you will need to have some beginner understanding of how to navigate Illustrator. It's really helpful to know shortcuts, so I will be using shortcuts throughout this workshop, but I'll do my best to explain what the shortcuts are so that you can follow along. Okay, so to start, I'm going to create a color palette based on this image here. So I'm just going to use the ellipse tool. The shortcut for that is L. And I'm going to just draw a few circles here, or draw one circle and just copy that over and create a color palette for us to work with. Okay, so, and you'll see why this is helpful a little bit later. We're going to use these colors when we use our gradient mesh. So you just want to go through and grab a couple of different colors, make sure that you have some variation here. You want to get some of the lighter colors as well as the darker tones as well. So I'm just grabbing this kind of shadow color there. And that should be pretty good. I think I'm going to switch this out for a lighter color. Okay, so you can barely see that there, but this is going to be helpful when we create our gradient. And these, when I overlap them, you can see they're really similar. So let me try and grab a different color here. Okay, so now when I put these next to each other, on top of each other, you can see I have a gradient here. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get started and create this monocyte here. So I'm going to use the ellipse tool again. So remember, shortcut L, and I'll go ahead and make a circle shape by holding down Shift on my keyboard. Okay, and this is going to be this big outer shape here. Okay, so we want to give it this organic shape here. So first I'm going to make this a darker color so that we can see it a little bit easier. And if you go over to Effects in the Properties panel and click on that, and then go down to Distort and Transform, and then select Roughen. Okay, you'll see that this ellipse now has a lot of texture around the edge. So we want it to have this kind of smooth organic shape. So if you go to size and lower that to about 1% or 2, and then on detail, we're going to lower that as well. And then down here for points, we want this to be smooth instead of corners. Okay, and we can lower down the detail a little bit more, and now you can see it's kind of just creating a little bit of an organic shape around the edge. Okay, I'll go ahead and say okay, and then if I unclick on that, you can see how it has distorted that edge there. Okay, so now that we have this rough shape here, we're going to need to expand this effect that we did. So to do that, go to Object, Expand Appearance, and as you can see, now the circle that we originally made is gone, and so all we have left now, if I was to zoom in here and select the direct selection tool, you can see those anchor points are now around this entire shape. So before we had a circle with an effect on it, but when you go to object and expand appearance, it just applies that effect to the shape. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and copy this shape a few more times. So I'm going to just click Control C on my keyboard and then Control Shift V to paste that in place. Okay, so if you just click Control C, Control V, which is cut and paste, it'll paste it anywhere, but if you click Control Shift V, it'll paste it in place. So let me do that one more time. So Control C, Control Shift V, and now I have 3 copies of this shape. Okay, so now that I have my 3 copies, I'm gonna go ahead and just turn off the visibility on these bottom 2. So those are actually just backup copies, because once you start applying the mesh, it's actually really hard to edit that mesh. So I like to have a couple of backup copies just in case I make a mistake and I don't really like the way it looks, then I can just kind of go back and have a saved a backup of the original. So I've turned off the visibility on those, and I will just go ahead and name all of these again so that we can keep track of everything. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and make the inner part of this monocyte, and I'm going to use the ellipse tool again. So just go ahead and create that shape there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just start by copying this color here, but I actually want to go ahead and create that color palette as well. So let me just move that down, and I'll go ahead and just copy these by selecting all of them and holding down Alt on my keyboard, and I can just quickly copy all of those. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same thing where I just kind of go through and select 4 colors from here. And this is really helpful when you're working with the mesh tool. You want to have your color palette handy because you'll just be selecting these colors and adding it to your mesh. And you want to make sure that you grab a good range of colors. So you want to have some midtones, some highlights, and dark color as well. And it doesn't matter what order they're in, just if you can't really tell if you have enough variety, it helps to just kind of put them on top of each other to make sure that you have enough of each value. And if you're not getting enough range from the reference image, you can also just double click on the fill color and manually set it to whatever it is that whatever color you want to do. So here I'm just lowering the scale on black, and then I'll add in a little bit more saturation so that it's not too gray. Click on OK. I think that's still a little too gray. Let me just play around with this color a little bit. Okay, and that looks good. So this is going to be my color palette for the inner part of this monocyte, and this will be my color palette for the outer part of the cell. Okay, so I'm just going to manually make this shape by using the curvature tool. So it's right next to the pen tool, and this allows you to really quickly manipulate a shape and create some curves. So to make that shape, and let me just scroll up a little so we can see, I'm kind of just going to tug and pull on it and try and create the outer shape here, the outline of it. Okay. And if it helps, you can always just take your reference image and put it right next to where you're working, or even underneath, and you can change the opacity so that you can see a little bit better. So I'm just clicking on these paths here and creating this outer shape. Okay, so I have my outer shape now, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, which is I'm going to just make a couple copies of it so that I have a backup. We are going to be using the mesh tool for both of these. Okay, so we're going to start by applying the mesh to the inner part of this cell here, and I've gone ahead and moved my reference back to the side so that we can see it a little bit better. And I can zoom in here. There we go. Okay, so to apply the mesh tool, you just need to click on the mesh tool in your toolbar or use the shortcut U. And it's going to apply some anchor points right away. And these paths will be connected by the outer anchor points that you've created. So for example, if I add one here, it's connecting this point to this point here. And so you can kind of just go through and select points, and it's going to start building this mesh gradient. You do want to be a little strategic about how you add these points, and it can really take a little bit of practice to figure out what the best way to apply these for your shape is. If you just start adding them randomly, you might not really get the effect that you want. So it's important to look at the shape that you're trying to recreate. For example, this one here, the gradient follows this curve here. So you want to make sure that the gradient that you're creating is also following that curve. So again, once you start adding a lot of points, it can actually just be really hard to control that. If you want to get rid of any points on your mesh gradient, you can hover over it and click Alt, and you'll see a minus sign appears underneath your cursor. And so that is how you can edit this and get rid of any extra points that are paths that you don't actually want. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these because I don't like the way that that gradient was coming through. So let me try and add these again. And I really want to focus on creating these paths that run along the edge of this shape here. So I'm going to add them just like this, and now I'm getting more of this shape that I wanted. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how the mesh looks right now. If you click off of it, you'll see that it disappears, but then once you hover over it, you'll be able to see the mesh again. Okay, so I've more or less followed what I want the gradient to look like. You can always edit these points a little bit after the fact, but do keep in mind that it's a little bit tricky to completely redo the mesh once you're done. So that's why I like to make a couple of copies ahead of time, because then you can always just kind of start over if you need to. Because you could always go through and just delete all of the points and then start over that way, but I just find it a little bit easier to have copies so that you can just start over from the beginning. Okay, so now to add color to these to this mesh, we're going to be clicking on these anchor points here and adding the color that way. So let me zoom out here so that I can grab the color palette and bring it down to where we need it. I'm just going to rotate this here. Okay, so now I can zoom in and have my color palette right here and my reference image here. Okay, so I'm going to use the direct selection tool. Remember, the shortcut for that is A. And I'm just going to click on any point here. So I'll go ahead and start from the outer edge, and we're going to use the eyedropper tool to select colors. So the shortcut for that is I, and I'll just go ahead and select a color here. And let me actually start with the midtones here, because I think we already are using this color, so that's our base. So I've selected an anchor point. I'm going to add this color here. And it's interesting because when I had these colors far from each other, I thought that this was a good next step, but now that I'm seeing it on this shape, I think it's not actually dark enough. So I'm going to undo all of the color that I just added, and I'm actually going to bring these colors a little bit closer together so that I can see my gradient a little bit better. I really want these to be the right colors. So this is my darkest color. Selecting that from there. Let me just give this another try. There we go. That's going to be a lot better. Okay, so this should give us a better gradient to work with. And you can always just leave these a little bit overlap. That's what I should have done from the beginning, just because colors look really different once they're up against each other. Sometimes you'll just kind of look at some colors and think that one is a lot darker than the other, but then once you put them next to each other, that doesn't end up being the case. So we're going to change this entire color to the darkest color here. So that's going to be our base. And I just selected the entire thing from the layers panel, and then I used the eyedropper tool to select that darkest color. And you'll notice I'm really using my shortcuts a lot. It really does speed up workflow. So if you're not too familiar with shortcuts, I would highly recommend the one that you'll use really often is the selection tool. The shortcut for that is V. And basically anytime you want to reset your cursor, you're just going to click V and that'll reset your cursor. So if I'm in the eyedropper tool and I've selected this, then I just click V on my keyboard and now I've reset my cursor and I can move on to do the next task. Okay, so I'm going to go through and select these points. I've opened up the mesh tool here, and I'm just going to click on these points by holding down Shift and selecting a few along this path here. And now I'm going to use the eyedropper tool to select this next color. And as you can see, it's subtle, so it's added a little bit of color along the line here. I'll zoom in so you can see that a little bit better, and I'm just going through and clicking those colors. So if I just exit out of this by using the selection tool, you can see it a little bit better. It's added some color along this edge here. So I'm using the direct selection tool here, and I'm just going to click on these points, and I'm going to add this second color here. Okay, direct selection tool again. And you really want to make sure that you are selecting the anchor points. They have to be added by selecting these anchor points. The colors have to be added that way. Okay, and now if I click off of it, you can see that it's added some shading along that line there. Okay, so we're just going to go through and build up this color gradient along these paths. And anywhere you see these spaces where you maybe have a darker color coming through, you can just kind of go through and kind of blend those by making sure that you have enough steps between each one. And then we're going to add some shading along here. So I'm going to go ahead and press U to open up the mesh tool again. And I want to add a point here so that I can kind of create some texture at the top here. Okay, so by dragging this line down a little bit, I'm going to try and create this sort of gradient that goes along here, and that's going to be the darkest color. So I'm using the darkest color here. And as you can see, it's creating a sort of 3D effect by adding the gradient. So some of these lines are a little bit harsh, so I think I need to just add a little bit more here. So the more you have the gradient in place, the more you can kind of add more of this color, but I like to just slowly build it up, and I'm getting a little bit messy here, so I do want to go ahead and clean this up by deleting some of these, and I'd rather recreate them and make them a little bit less messy. I don't like having all of those paths all over the place, so let me just go through and add those once again. Okay, so I'm just kind of going through and making adjustments and taking a look at the reference image and just seeing where I still need to add a little bit of texture or shading and make adjustments to these colors. Okay, so it's not perfect, but I'm pretty happy with where it's at right now. It's a lot like painting. You can really get lost in like every single color that you're applying, but ultimately I think when you zoom out, if it reads as a 3D shape, that's the effect that you're going for. When you're really zoomed in, sometimes it can be hard to tell if the effect is working or not, but once you zoom out, you should be able to see. And keeping in mind that a lot of times these figures are going to be quite small, so you do want to kind of just take a step back and make sure that the overall picture and the overall effect is working. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move this color palette out of the way, and we're going to get started on the outer part of the shape here. So let me go ahead and just click on that and move it up. And I'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to bring this color palette down, and before I get started, I'll go ahead and bring these colors closer to one another so that I can make sure that this color palette does indeed work. Okay, so I've gone ahead and adjusted this color palette, and this color here is really hard to see, but I think it'll provide a good highlight once we get started on adding this the gradient to this. Okay, so once again, I'm going to just go ahead and quickly apply this same mesh effect to this outer part of the cell. Okay, so now that I've added my texture to this outer shape, I want to make it a little bit transparent. So there are some blending modes that we can apply to this shape. Okay, so as you can see, I selected soft light here, and that does allow this shape to come through. There are a ton of different blending modes, and they will affect the way that the layer underneath looks. So you can just kind of go through and see the different effects of that. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on soft light, and then you will maybe need to make some further adjustments to the color once you've selected a blending mode, because it does change the way that the color looks. So that is how I recreated this monocyte by using the mesh tool. Okay, so next up, I want to show you how you can make a blood cell like this, also using the mesh tool. And I've already created this one, and I just wanted to show you what the mesh looks like. So this effect is a little bit harder because you have to round out the mesh, and kind of creating these curves within the mesh can get a little bit tricky, because when you start to change the curves on the paths on these, it does affect everything around it. So you can't just affect one path without affecting the other one that it's connected to. So let me go ahead and show you how I did this, and then we're going to add a texture on top of this as well. So I'll start by grabbing my color palette and moving that up here. And we're going to use the ellipse tool, and I'm just going to hold down Shift and make a circle here. And then we'll go ahead and use the eyedropper tool, shortcut I, to use the darkest red. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply the mesh to this circle. And again, the shortcut for that is U. And in order to try and make this shading around the edge, we're going to want to try and place it sort of towards the outside of the circle. And then I'll place another one right out here. Okay, so you'll see that the way that the mesh gets applied, it already has a little bit of curvature to it. And if you're familiar with working with the pen tool, this is very similar. I've just selected the direct selection tool, so now I can see the handles on my anchor points. And Again, it's like the pen tool, so when you pull on these handles, it curves the line, so, or it curves the path rather. So I just drag on these handles and you can see now it's curved this line. And like I was saying earlier, it does affect the other parts of the path. So because these two paths are intersecting, it does create a little bit of a bend here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. So this bend here, so that can be a little bit tricky. I haven't found a good way to work to move these outer anchor points on the mesh tool, because when you start moving the outer anchor points, it actually distorts the shape as a whole. So if I grab that and move it, it changes the entire shape, which I don't want. So again, you just have to kind of little by little make these adjustments. So I'm just trying to create a round mesh here. And then I'll go ahead and add a second set of paths on the inside. So I'll just come in a little bit, maybe about here, and then add another one here. And then again, I'm gonna go through and just try and round these edges out by grabbing onto the anchor point. And then you can kind of go back and adjust things as you see fit. These as well. And then you can always just go back and adjust this once you've added in your colors, of course. You'll have a better sense of what shapes you need. So, okay, I think that's pretty good for now. I'm gonna go ahead and use my direct selection tool again. So remember, shortcut A, and select all of the first anchor points from the first path I added. So I'll hold down Shift on my keyboard and select these anchor points. Okay, so with all of those selected, I'm going to switch to the eyedropper tool, and I'm going to select this second color, and this is very subtle, so you can't really see it right now, but once we click off of here, you'll be able to see what we did. Okay, and then to add a little bit of dimension to this, I'm going to click on just one of the points from this inner path that we added, and I'm going to add this lighter color, and then I'm going to select another one of the inner points and use the lightest color, and then select the other point. So I'm going around and I'm just adding different colors to the four most inner points. For this one, I'm going to use a darker color, so I'm going to go with the darkest color here. Okay, so once I click off of this, you can see that we've added some texture, and now it looks like it has this dip in it, so it's got a little bit of a indentation in it that mimics what a red blood cell looks like. And you could go through and adjust these points if it feels like it needs a little bit of an adjustment there. The closer that these paths are to each other, the sharper that the lines are going to be. So just by moving those points towards the center, I sort of softened up the edge there. So it's basically creating a gradient. So when you put a color on one point and then a different color on another point, and then you move those points further away, it creates a softer gradient. If you move them closer together, it creates a sharper gradient, so a sharp edge. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good as it is. Okay, so I'm going to add some texture to this shape, and I really should have copied this shape before I added the mesh to it, but I forgot to do that, so I'm just going to use my ellipse tool to draw a circle over it. And the reason that it's really better to do this beforehand is because then you don't have to try and match the exact size of the shape. So I just switched to a stroke here so we can see the shape underneath, but that's okay. I'll just do my best to try and match the exact size of this shape. You could always just go to properties, for example, for this shape and copy. This is the exact width and height value of this shape, and then you could just type it into your ellipse and try and match it that way. So that's probably the easiest way to do it, but I'm going to do it the hard way and just kind of eyeball it and try and match this shape. It's not really the hard way, but it's less precise. But that's okay. I just want to show you how you can add a clipping mask and add texture to this shape. So I have my ellipse now, and I'm just going to use an image that I found that has texture, and you can find these on like Free Pick, Pexels, if you just look up on any of these websites. So that's freepik, FREEPIK.com, or Pexels, PEXELS.com, and type in texture and you'll find these images. So I have my ellipse and I've placed it on top of this image, and I'm just going to select both of them, and then you can go up to Object and go down to Clipping Mask and select Make, or you can also just use the shortcut, which is Control+7. So the image has now been essentially cut down to the shape that we put on top of it. So the entire image is still there. You can still select the image and scale it, for example. So I'm just going to scale this image up and down, and you see it always stays within that clipping mask that we made. So clipping masks are really great. You can use them for a variety of techniques. So this is one way to use a clipping mask to add texture to a very specific area. So now that we have our clipping mask in place, I'm just going to use a blending mode to blend this texture layer onto the blood cell that we made. Okay, so if I select multiply, for example, so this is just in the transparency panel. If you don't see this, just go up to Window and select transparency to open this box. So I'm selecting the clipping mask that we made, and you can kind of just play around with some different ways that you can overlay the texture, and you can see that depending on what you choose, it interacts with the shape in different ways. Okay, so I'm going to go with multiply, and then I'm also going to decrease the opacity so that it's not too harsh. Okay, so I just want to add a little bit of texture to that. Okay, so I actually decided to change that to overlay. I think that looks a little bit better. And so as you can see, it just adds a little bit of texture to it and makes it look a little bit, have more dimension, and makes it look a little bit more realistic or rendered. And so yeah, that's how I use the mesh tool in order to create a blood cell, a red blood cell. And those are some advanced techniques that you can use to recreate figures in Adobe Illustrator. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I hope you enjoyed this workshop.